Welcome to MTI Webinars, the online learning channel of MedTech Intelligence. Thank you for joining us today for today's program on Japan medical device reimbursement strategy. I'm Rick Byros. I am the president of Innovative Publishing, the publisher of MedTech Intelligence, and today I am the program host. Just to keep up with things, let's just review a few housekeeping items. You've joined today as a participant in listen-only mode, and you must use your own device settings to adjust the volume and the visual appearance of your screen. If you're having audio or screen issues, please log out and log back in. Today's program is a 40-minute presentation followed by an audience Q&A. During the presentation, you can communicate with the program organizer and the other participants by using our chat function. If you have questions for the presenter, please use the questions feature within the Go To panel menu. You can submit questions at any time during the presentation, but don't use the chat function for the questions for the presenter. Type your Q&A questions only in the questions panel. We will answer as many questions as time allows after the presentation. We will follow up directly through an email to any questions that we're unable to address due to time constraint. The program is being recorded, and we will be sending an on-demand link following the event. A follow-up email with that link and related information will be sent following the webinar that usually takes about 24 to 48 hours. Today's program is presented and sponsored by Pacific Bridge Medical, a medical consulting firm dedicated to assisting medical companies with regulatory strategy, product registration, and business development in Asia for more than 30 years. Today's presenter is Pacific Bridge Medical founder and president, Ames Gross. Since 1988, Ames has helped hundreds of medical device companies with regulatory strategy, reimbursement issues, and business development in Asia. As a recognized national and international leader in Asian medical markets, he has contributed numerous articles on Asian medical issues, and Ames is a frequent industry speaker. Ames is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and received his MBA from Columbia University. Ames, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sponsoring today's webinar, and glad that you're here, and let me turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you, Rick. I appreciate that. And again, my name is Ames Gross, and I'm the president of Pacific Bridge Medical. You can learn more about our company by going to our website. You can see on the slide here in yellow, pacificbridgemedical.com. Thank you very much for attending. We appreciate your consideration. Next slide. So just a couple slides here introducing our company. As Rick mentioned, I started the company in 1988. Actually, that's about 37 years ago, not 34 years ago. And we exclusively focus on helping device and IVD companies in the Asian marketplace. Next slide. We have 4 offices in Asia, and we have a number of affiliate partners in the other Asian markets. Next slide. Now, before we get started, I'm wondering how many people on the call today work at device companies, and a new device or a unique device comes out from the company, and the management says, great, let's go to Japan. Or we're already selling in Japan, let's expand our business there. So what happens oftentimes is an international sales and marketing or sales and marketing professional calls up the regulatory person and tells the regulatory person, please register our new or unique device in Japan. But oftentimes at the same time, they give little consideration for reimbursement. Later on, what happens is that the company finds out that the Japan reimbursement price is not high enough so that the company can sell their products in Japan and make money. So at that point, you've invested a lot of money on business development, registration of your new or unique device in Japan, and you're not finding that you're making money there. So this is why reimbursement in device is such an important issue. Please keep in mind that if you're in many global markets, if the product costs $1,000 and the reimbursement's $500, the patient can self-pay the remaining $500. But in Japan, Japanese people only used fully reimbursed products. It's illegal to pay out of pocket. So that's why the device reimbursement in Japan becomes so crucial. Now, 10 to 15 years ago, Japan reimbursement equaled or sometimes even it was higher than US reimbursement. However, that is no longer the case. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Another issue of why is Japan so important? Well, of course, Japan is the third largest single device market in the world. First, we have the US, China, and then Japan. But its reimbursement system, as I mentioned, is different. The point is that if you get a reimbursement in Japan, oftentimes that reimbursement is followed in other Asian markets. So if you don't succeed in Japan with your reimbursement, you may hinder your efforts to get a higher reimbursement in countries like Korea, Taiwan, and China. So starting off here, who are the key stakeholders for device reimbursement in Japan? I think most people are aware of the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare. That's the key reimbursement agency in Japan. The PMDA is the key government agency for product registration, but the MHLW is for reimbursement. Then under the MHLW, you have the Central Social Insurance Medical Council, and you have called CHUIKIO. And oftentimes the Central Social Insurance Medical Council underneath CHUIKIO will do the first evaluation of reimbursement options in Japan. Also very important in Japan are the academic societies and the insurance committee person at those societies. So here we're looking at, the Academic Society of Radiology or the Academic Society of Cardiology. These societies have a lot to do with the reimbursement in Japan. Next slide. So in addition, we have KOLs. So KOLs are normally within each of the academic societies. So getting the KOLs on your side is very important in reimbursement too. Oftentimes you have professors or academics that do cost effectiveness analysis studies in Japan too. In some cases, you want to have a Japanese cost effectiveness analysis study done. And of course, your registration, whether that's by your own subsidiary office in Japan or an independent third party or your distributor, is also very involved in the reimbursement process, because the MAH holder is the one that the Japanese government looks to for all issues, including reimbursement. Next slide. So oftentimes what we see now is that companies don't think about their reimbursement strategy when they submit they don't think about their reimbursement strategy when they submit registration dossiers for product registration. So selecting the correct JMDN code during registration is crucial. The chosen code directly affects the functional reimbursement category your device falls into in future reimbursement. So the dossier for the registration should comprehensively present the clinical value of the device. But the supporting information for reimbursement is also important. A well-prepared registration dossier lays the foundation for future reimbursement success. Companies may request a preliminary meeting with the MHLW before the device approval to present their proposed reimbursement strategy and gauge the initial feedback. While this can provide helpful direction and alert the MHLW to your pricing expectations, It does not guarantee approval on future reimbursement levels. So oftentimes what we've seen at companies is, the sales and marketing guy tells the regulatory person register the product. The registration person is not so familiar with market access or reimbursement. So if they don't put in the right JMDN code, which reflect a higher reimbursement in the future, which can be reflected in a higher reimbursement code in the future, you will have a problem down the road. Next slide. So the main way that reimbursement is determined in Japan is through medical device functional reimbursement categories. And you can see A1, A2, and A3. These are technical fees where the device is reimbursed as part of the medical procedure. Functional categories B1, B2, and B3 are normally geared towards standalone devices. And categories C1 and C2 are normally used for new innovative products where there's a new functional category for C1, or for C2, where there's a new functional category and a new technical fee. Next slide. So here again, device reimbursement is done via functional reimbursement categories, since most devices have similar predicates with existing reimbursement. Under the similar functional comparison method, additional surcharges such as usefulness and improvement or marketability surcharges can be applied if the device demonstrates superior performance or utility compared to comparative products already on the market. So that's why you have A1, and then if you have some additional surcharge, you can go to A2 or A3. And also similarly for B1, if you have an additional surcharge, you can go to B2 and B3. But again, this is within the functional categories. Yeah, and this is the third point here is referring to what I talked about before with regard to the registration and the JMDN code. For example, if the function of a device falls under the definition of an existing functional category, but its JMDN code is not found in the applicable JMD codes of that functional category, modifications may be needed. So you want to be careful when you're registering in the JMD code, and you want to be careful about the functional categories. Next slide. So this just goes into more of the same information that we just talked about on the functional categories, and it gives you some more definition of this slide is on A1, A2, and A3. So as I mentioned, this is in the technical fee in the A reimbursement categories. The coverage is a comprehensive via technical fee, included in the doctor's fee, and authorized, it's an existing reimbursement category. So if you get to functional categories A2 or A3, you can see that there's been some changes or improvements which will garnish a slightly higher reimbursement. But keep in mind that normally in functional categories A2 and A3, the increase of the reimbursement over the A1 reimbursement is normally around 5% or so. So it's not dramatically more. Next slide. Here again, we're looking at functional categories B1, B2, and B3. So here we're talking about separate device fees, depending on the functional category. And again, on B2 or B3, a slight premium can be given on the reimbursement because the use is new or there's an additional price improvement, etc. Next slide. So again, functional categories C1 and C2 are for new or unique products. C1, there's a new function, and C2, there's a new function, new technology. So in C1, these are devices that are based on an existing therapy or product. A technical fee already exists for the procedure, but a new functional category is needed because it's a new or unique product. On C2, these are devices with both a new technical fee and a new functional category, and think here about breakthrough products. So oftentimes US FDA products that get breakthrough designation will look to get into the C2 reimbursement category. Next slide. Now, in the past, foreign reference pricing was another parameter, as well as functional pricing, to help determine reimbursement amounts in Japan. However, over the last 5 years, we've seen a drop in foreign reference pricing as a mechanism for reimbursement. So let's go through some of the details. The MHLW, the Medical Economic Division or Health Insurance Bureau of the MHLW, has a basic policy states that the reimbursement price in Japan should absolutely be lower than that of the United States. They always try to reduce total medical expenditures. Because remember, in Japan, it's a single payer system. The government is paying all health care. There's no Prudential, Aetna, or Cigna life insurance companies, and it's the government who's paying. Now, this policy that the Japanese reimbursement should always be lower than that of the United States was just initiated really five or 6 years ago. In the past, the reimbursement in Japan could be equivalent to the US, but we find that that's no longer the case. And you can see on the second bullet point, the Medical Economic Division is said to have a life or death power. And so foreign manufacturers may lose if they claim too much. You don't want to go in with a reimbursement of like $5,000 in the United States and then say you want $6,000 in Japan per procedure or per product. It's not going to work. Foreign reference pricing is basically an average price in 5 countries: England, France, Germany, US, and Australia. Good results or efficacy are important, but so is reduced recurrence and reduced hospital time. Because in Japan, the average hospital time is over 20 days, where in the United States, the average hospital time is around 2 or 2.5 to 3 days. So the government is paying out of pocket for over 20 days for the patient to be in Japan. It's very expensive, and good results or efficacy are very important, and you need to show that through clinical benefits. Now, in generally, while reimbursement is going down every 2 years, the PMDA is trying to provide more funding for some innovative or high-need medical devices. Next slide. What we've seen over the last 5 to 7 years, though, or actually 5 to 8 years or so, is a reduction in foreign reference pricing, with the Japanese government adding certain ratios and formulas onto the average price of the 5 countries. Some of those formulas are outlined below. If the product price in one of the comparison companies is more than 2.5 times more than the product price in the lowest foreign average price country, the highest price country will be discarded, and the foreign reference price will be determined on the basis of the remaining 4 countries. The ratio is a reduction from the previous figure of 3x. So again, if it was 3x, you would have a larger reduction. But the point is that oftentimes the highest price will be in the United States. So when you throw out the United States, then you have 4 reference countries, and those 4 reference countries' prices will be the new foreign average price. Another formula that's been implemented: if the highest price is more than 1.6 times the average of the other 4 countries, the maximum price will be set at 1.6. This is down from the previous ratio of 1.8. So here we're just looking at the foreign average pricing of the 4 countries, and again, a formula to reduce the pricing. As I mentioned, oftentimes the US is the highest price, so GQ will drop the US price and average the other 4 countries, or sometimes they drop the highest 2 prices, which oftentimes tends to be the United States and Australia, and just average the remaining 3 countries. What we see now for foreign reference pricing, as I mentioned, it's less important than it used to be. And foreign reference pricing in Japan now often comes close to what you see as the average price in the 3 European countries, England, France, and Germany. Next slide. So as I mentioned, GQ, or the Japanese government, now places less emphasis on foreign reference pricing than in the past. And in some cases, they can use foreign reference pricing as a justification of reducing reimbursement levels rather than supporting higher prices. So for companies that have new or unique products looking to achieve a premium reimbursement in the functional category C1 or C2, the most important factor today is the clinical efficacy or superior of the device. So we need strong clinical evidence to show the superior of the device to help the patients and reduce costs in Japan. 2 main methods to determine reimbursement. Let's see. Okay, Max, 2 main methods to determine reimbursement increases. So the 2 main areas now to focus on, forgetting the foreign reference pricing for the time being, is the functional comparison chart, which we showed you, and the cost accounting method. The cost accounting method. So given the complexities of the reimbursement framework in Japan, it is essential for manufacturers of innovative devices or unique breakthrough products to begin planning early and to structure their pricing strategies around clinical evidence, clinical trials, cost justifications, and potential regulatory responses. But again, the main thing companies want to focus on are clinical success, clinical efficacy, and the functional categories, with foreign reference pricing being less important in today's market. Next slide. Now, the cost accounting method can be approached in 2 ways, either by calculating all the costs to make the product, or by starting with the import price of the product into Japan and adding estimates for things like selling expenses, general and administrative costs, operating profit, etc. So the main issue, if you're trying to determine what the R&D on the manufacturing costs, is how should you allocate the R&D? So the company spent $5 million on R&D. You expect to sell 10% of your product in Japan, so maybe you can allocate 10% of the R&D budget for your cost calculation when trying to determine the total manufacturing cost. And again, for the cost accounting method, you need to determine which one of these 2 approaches will be better for the specific medical device and the manufacturer. Next slide. Here we just try to give you a sense of what when you do make a reimbursement application submission, what documents are required. So you can see on the first bullet point, the main submission form is the main application document. But attached to the main submission form, there are a number of forms that need to be attached. So that's sort of the third bullet point. Estimated number of applicant patients and estimated sales, and the basis for this. How many patients do you think are going to use your product in Japan? So you're starting out with how many people have the disease, how many people have the subdisease that you're trying to treat, and you try to estimate the number of applicable patients. Also, you might want to look at the similar functional classification and why you selected the functional classification. Also, why is the product unique? There's no similar functional classification. And then, so these are the different attachments or the forms that need to be submitted with your main submission form. Next slide. And this is just showing you what the main submission form template looks like. Obviously, you have the name of the company, the name of the product, classification, product overview, and then then you have to add things like the maintenance, how you calculate the maintenance, the desired price you want, the foreign average price, again, not as important, and things of this nature. So actually, when we do this kind of submission for our clients, we submit this in pretty good detail, especially focusing on the clinical benefit. Next slide. As I mentioned before, excellent clinical data is required for higher device reimbursement. So how can we show the clinical benefits? We need to do clinical studies. Normally for a product registration, if the clinical study is done in the US or Europe, it can oftentimes be accepted in Japan for product registration. However, the question whether the clinical study results can be used for reimbursement is often unclear. You have to consider, are there any ethnic differences in the clinical study? And how would the results of the clinical study used for reimbursement affect Japanese patients as opposed to Western patients? Again, we want to make sure that the foreign clinical data that's used for the registration and hopefully for the reimbursement, that there are no ethnic differences. So again, the studies must clearly demonstrate superiority in diagnosing or treating disease, including patient management and measurable enhancements in patient outcomes, and hopefully reduce expenses for the Japanese government. The patient gets out of the hospital quicker, the patient gets back to work quicker, etc. Next slide. So as I just mentioned, justifications for higher pricing often require evidence of greater efficiency or improved safety compared to existing devices on the market already. The clinical data submitted must include well-defined quantitative and qualitative endpoints. These should be carefully selected and validated, and clinical data endpoints can be discussed with the MHLW in a meeting before you actually do the product registration in Japan. Again, you want to do the foreign clinical data according to Japanese GCP standards, and hopefully there's no ethnic differences. And again, early discussions with the PMDA are highly recommended to ensure alignment on clinical endpoints that will support your reimbursement application. So you haven't submitted a registration dossier yet, but you can have a meeting with the MHLW to present information on your product, why it's unique, and what kind of pricing you're expecting. So you can have this MHLW reimbursement meeting before you submit the registration document. The issue is, how much feedback will you get from the MHLW in this preliminary reimbursement meeting? And will it be enough feedback and give you enough assurance that registering the product in Japan now makes sense? Next slide. Of course, another key ingredient for reimbursement is doing a cost effectiveness analysis. How the use of the medical device impacts the overall healthcare costs and patient outcomes in the Japanese healthcare system. So this is where some academics or professors in the medical field do cost-effective analysis studies. These studies are based on Japanese data. Using Western data here is not going to work. So again, this includes things like quantifying the hospital stays, the outpatient care, the drug use, etc. As I mentioned, this is typically done by a professor or an academic in the relevant medical field. And device manufacturers are normally the ones that have to support this kind of cost-effectiveness research. And the research must be perceived as independent, even though the device manufacturer is paying the professor or the academic person to do the study. And it must be credible with Japanese authorities and, very importantly, the key academic societies in Japan that are appropriate for your specific medical device. Next slide. So here we talk about real-world data from Japanese clinical studies is highly valuable. However, Western cost-effectiveness data can sometimes be used to supplement local findings if there are no ethnic differences. Of course, it's always better if we have Japanese data. Updated and localized economic data are critical to justify a request for increased reimbursement, particularly if the original pricing leads to an unprofitable business. The data must demonstrate that the device reduces total healthcare costs or significantly improves patient care efficiency. So we had one company that did a cost-effective analysis that was 4 years old. And the MHLW and the society said, well, this is 4-year-old data. We need to do a new study with current data and current numbers to plug into your formula in Japan. So a strong cost-effective case not only supports reimbursement increases in Japan, but also aligns with the Japanese government and reduce spending and improving the care of Japanese patients. Next slide. Now, a lot of times people in device companies are not aware of how important the academic societies are and the key opinion leaders. So as I mentioned before, academic societies play a central role in the Japanese medical device reimbursement process. This could be, Japanese Society of Cardiology, Japanese Society of Orthopedics. They influence the clinical guidelines on how to treat or diagnose disease, and they assess the device value, and they can apply to the MHLW for increased reimbursement. So increased reimbursement is generally applied through an academic society in conjunction with the MAH in Japan. A device company seeking higher reimbursement must collaborate closely with the relevant academic society that covers the clinical use of your device. Now, building relationships with key opinion leaders within these societies, the specific academic society that's geared toward your product is essential because these individuals or the KOLs can advocate for the device if its clinical and economic benefits are well supported. Now, also, you don't want to forget, normally what happens is the companies may develop a relationship with the president of an academic society, and that's important to do. But keep in mind, at the society, there's normally a key opinion leader or a key doctor who's heading the reimbursement group of the academic society. And it's just as important to get to know the key doctor heading the reimbursement group as the president of the society. We recently had a situation where the company lobbied the president of the society, and they thought that their petition or application for increased reimbursement was going to be submitted. But then what we found out later on was that the president had a lot of things on their mind and wasn't on track to things. And while they told the foreign medical device company, yes, you're on the increased reimbursement list that we will submit, we found out later on that the key doctor for the reimbursement group, we had no relationship with them. And we had no idea that the key doctor heading the reimbursement group was not alerted to our increased reimbursement request. So, given the fact that reimbursement in Japan is determined every 2 years, we are now 2 years behind the 8 ball. Next slide. So here again, as I mentioned, the manufacturer local MAH prepares and submits an updated evidence, including new clinical data and cost effectiveness assessments to the Surgical Society's Insurance Committee, or the Gaihurin, and they review the completeness of the submission before forwarding it to the CHIKIO, the Central Social Insurance Medical Council, and then which ultimately informs CHIKIO of the reimbursement decision. To maintain credibility, the manufacturer's name should not appear on the formal documents submitted to these committees. Next slide. Now, how else can you increase reimbursement? So if your device is reimbursement for one indication, but the same device can also be used for another indication, increased reimbursement may be possible. But for the new indication, you will oftentimes need to get a new device approval. And of course, getting a new device approval for a new indication could be costly and time consuming, especially if Japanese local clinical trials are needed. But keep in mind, however, even if the second indication gets a higher reimbursement than the first indication, the MHLW may say now you can sell more devices for both indications, so your volumes will be up, so your profits will be higher, and then they decide to lower the reimbursement for the first indication. We've seen this several times over the last 5 to 7 years. Next slide. Now, what else can you do? So you've gotten a reimbursement in Japan, and then the reimbursement in Japan is not providing a profit on your sales. So what else can you do? You can claim that your business in Japan is unprofitable. And you can say, if we can't get a higher reimbursement, we may consider leaving Japan. Now, for certain products, the Japanese government doesn't want you to leave Japan because they're cost effective or because they provide increased patient care and they want the products to stay in Japan. So sometimes after you have a reimbursement, you can go back several years later and say, we're not making any money and we'd like to get a higher reimbursement. And you can say, listen, if we don't get a higher reimbursement, the business in Japan is not profitable, we may decide not to stay there. Recently, we have an example where a device company was very eager to get reimbursement in Japan. A device company was very eager to get registration in Japan, and they didn't really consider the reimbursement situation when they registered the product. Hence, they got their unique device registered in Japan, but the Japanese government gave them, sort of a low reimbursement. This is a large piece of equipment where the product sold for like $1.5 million, and the procedural cost allocated by the Japanese government was like $7,000 per procedure. Now, in this case, about 20 hospitals in Japan purchased the equipment for $1.5 million. So that was great. But when the hospitals then wanted to run the procedure and they had to purchase the consumables, the consumable or the procedure reimbursement was like $7,000, which didn't cover the hospital costs. So the hospitals would spend $1.5 million on buying the equipment. Now we're in a position where if they did the procedure, the price of the procedure and the consumable reimbursement was too low to generate a profit. So oftentimes the hospitals would not do the procedure. So in this case, the foreign device company is now attempting to go to the Japanese government and say, listen, You have 20 hospitals. They spent 1.5 million or $30 million buying our stuff, but they can't run the procedure. And if they can't run the procedure, nobody's making no money and nobody's getting treatment. Whether this appeal to the MHLW will work is not clear. Now, in this case, the procedure reimbursement was like 7,000 in Japan, and it was double or more than double than that in the US and Europe. The bottom line is looking into the Japanese reimbursement ahead of time, thinking how that's going to affect your sales and sales price is crucial and should be examined upfront before taking new products or unique products to Japan. Next slide. So thank you for your participation. I hope this gave some insight into some of the participants on how important reimbursement is in Japan before registering a new product there. I think we have about 20 minutes or 18 minutes left in this webcast, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that have been sent in to Rick
Yes.
now.
Yeah, Ames, thanks so much for that presentation and the information that you provided. We have actually a bunch of questions. And so they're not necessarily a particular order. I'm just going to read them as the attendees have sent them in. So let me see here. What if my device name includes my company name?
Well, I think if your device name includes your company name, I guess that's a little hard to keep it separate from the MHLW for the submission. So I think that would be okay in that case. I mean, you would want to make sure, though, that the company name and the product name are used similarly in other global markets. So if that's the case, I think it might be okay.
Okay. Next question is, what is the typical price calculation method if the product is only marketed in the USA and not in Europe?
Well, again, foreign reference pricing is less important in Japan today than it used to be. If you only have a price in the US, the Japanese government will look at it, but again, they're looking to make Japanese prices lower than US prices.
Mm-hmm.
We see that in some situations that device companies have the product registered and reimbursed in the US, but they haven't gone to Europe, Australia, Canada, or whatever yet.
Okay. Next question. What are the criteria that direct me towards C1 or C2 with a new device, and what's the difference?
Well, I think we discussed that during the presentation, the criteria for C1 and C2. So, you have to see whether there's both a new functional and technical fee or technical situation for either one of those, and then pick one of them. If you're not sure, you can normally talk to your local MAH, and they should be able to give you some guidance on that.
Okay. Next question. If you cannot get the MHLW to commit to a certain reimbursement up front, how can you know whether the pricing in the future will yield profits without registering your device first?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you can definitely have a meeting with the MHLW before you register your products. You can provide information on your product, why it's advantageous, unique, etc., even how it may help the patients and reduce costs in Japan. So you can do that. But as I mentioned, normally during that MHLW meeting, you'll get some preliminary feedback from the MHLW, but it's unusual for them to quote a final price at that point. Now, if you have new clinical data, let's say 3 or 6 months later, we could have a second MHLW meeting trying to provide the point to support the point from your first MHLW meeting. But again, it's not common that they would give you a final reimbursement price. So it's tough to get the pricing down before you actually do the registration.
Hmm.
Now, when you have the MHLW meeting, if you can show good data and the Japanese MHLW agrees that the data looks great, we're saving money, we're saving patients, we're helping patients get back to work, etc. I think you can get a strong sense of that they agree or disagree with what you're saying. But getting a specific final price is not an easy thing to come by.
Mm. I mean, is there, in your experience, any kind of percentage that gets what you're looking for?
I couldn't say that there's a percentage of the US price or European
Mm.
price or whatever. It's hard to say. But
Okay.
I think most device companies have to think that whereas 10 or 15 years ago, the pricing in Japan was equal or even higher in some cases than it was in the US,
Hmm.
those days are all over. As I mentioned, we see a lot of times the Japanese pricing being more closely aligned with European pricing.
Hmm.
So even if you only have the product registered and reimbursed in the US, normally the company will have a sense of what they expect to get for reimbursement in Europe. I think that's a good barometer for what to expect in Japan.
Okay. Um, you had, in the presentation, you had mentioned about building relationships with KOLs at academic societies. Can you expand on that? Like, how do you build those relationships? I mean, are we talking taking these people out to play golf, or expand a little bit on that?
Well, I think the main thing is it takes time, energy, and work to court KOL relationships. You cannot call up a KOL or get in touch with a KOL and say, we need your help in 2 weeks to support our product. That won't work. Normally, KOL relationships take somewhere between 1 and 3 years to court. How can you
Hmm.
get those KOLs on board with you? Well, a KOL in the cardiology space will go to cardiology conferences. So, do you have an exhibit booth at that cardiology conference? Can you have some Western speakers talk about your device and its success with Western patients in the cardiology field? There's ways to get in touch with these KOLs and then give them some education up front. It's important to remember that oftentimes companies tell me, "Hey, we have a KOL in the US, Mr. Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith knows Dr. Fuji in Japan. Let's use him as our KOL. We're both in
Hmm.
the cardio field." But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Fuji in Japan may or may not be a top KOL. When you're getting KOLs to support you at the society, for reimbursement at the society, or just KOLs in general to support you, it's important that you get the top KOLs, not just any KOL. Another way that some companies can build relationships with KOLs is doctors can import non-registered products into Japan for their own personal use. Now, if they use the product for their own personal use, there's no reimbursement, but in some cases, doctors are willing to do that. That's a way for a Japanese KOL doctor to have some actual success with your product on their own patients. And then if they have some success there, they're highly ranked in the KOL system in Japan in that field, then that will give you some way to to strengthen your relationship and support for that Japanese KOL. Other ways, sometimes Western companies will invite Japanese KOLs to US hospitals where the devices are being used, or invite Japanese KOLs to talk to thought leaders in the West. So these are all good ways to cement your relationship with the KOL. The main point is to get to the right KOLs. They're really at the top of the rung, top of the ladder. And number two, it takes time. So you need to do this preparation well in advance.
So you really need to have boots on the ground. I mean, there
Well,
to
company,
really.
com- companies either have their own boots on the ground or they hire consultants like us to start to build the relationship with the KOL. Obviously, if the KOL comes to the US, they can build direct relationships, but it takes time.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if that was something that Pacific Bridge can help companies with.
Yeah, we do KOL search. We work with KOLs to introduce products, to get them up to speed, and then to help them connect with the companies to learn more about the technology, et cetera.
Hmm. Okay. This is an ambiguous question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How long does it take typically to get reimbursement in Japan?
Well, if you're going into an existing functional category and things are pretty clear, it normally takes 3 to 4 months, 3 to 6 months, I'd say. If you're trying to get a higher reimbursement in functional category C1 or C2, where you're presenting cost, the manufacturing cost for a product, it could take more than 6 months.
Hmm.
So keep in mind that the product may be registered. It may take a few months to get an existing reimbursement, but to get to a new reimbursement or a higher reimbursement, it could take 6 months or more.
Hmm. Okay. It's actually less than I thought, but um, the previous question was about building relationships. This one goes kind of a little bit in the opposite direction. If Japan pricing is not yielding a profit and you threaten the MHLW to close your Japanese business, but you actually decide not to close your business, will this cause ill will with the Japanese government?
Well, like I mentioned, if the price is too low in Japan and you're not making profits, you can approach the MHLW and ask them for increased reimbursement. To get that increased reimbursement, you have to provide a lot of data and information to the MHLW since you already have a reimbursement which has been allocated to you in the past. So you have to be careful about threatening to do this or threatening to leave Japan, but you can show in the additional information you send to the PMDA why this is causing you to lose money, and again, how it's unprofitable for you to stay in Japan.
Hmm.
If you give the impression to the MHLW that you are thinking about leaving Japan because of the unprofitable nature of it, but in fact, you really don't want to do that, you just sort of want to have a quiet threat, you can still keep working in Japan and you can still keep working with the doctors, the KOLs, and the society, and you can still keep doing the procedures. Because if the Japanese government thinks we haven't increased your price and you're still doing business, you're still helping our patients and hopefully reducing costs, so you can continue to do that. So that's
Okay.
fine. You can continue even if you've had a slight threat that you may be leaving the market there.
Okay. Last question. How does the Japanese device reimbursement compare to China device reimbursement today?
Japan reimbursement for devices versus China reimbursement for devices. Well, today we went over how the Japanese reimbursement prices are determined. China has its own reimbursement system, and now in China, the reimbursements are often done more on a provincial level.
Mm.
So the NMPA, or the National Medical Products Association, has regional offices where in each regional office, there's somebody in charge of health insurance, reimbursement, etc. So normally now in China, if you want to get reimbursement for a new product, what you need to do is you need to first court a hospital. The hospital has to then, so you have to court a hospital and key opinion leaders at the hospital that your device has some unique value and should be used. Then the hospital needs to send in a petition to the local NMPA office requesting higher reimbursement. Normally in China, to get higher reimbursement, the device will have to be on the market without any reimbursement for 1 to 2 years.
Oh,
Once you've built a track record in China for a new or unique product for 1 or 2 years, then you'll be eligible to get increased reimbursement in China. So the process is a little more complicated in some ways in China. It's more provincially focused, and you may have to have your device on the market for a significant amount of time before it's reimbursed there.
Well, that sounds like potentially enough information there for another webinar on China. So, listen, thank you, Ames.
It's another topic, yes.
Yeah. But thank you again. This is a great overview and some guidance and best practices for the Japanese medical device market and reimbursement to that market. I wanted to thank again Pacific Bridge Medical for sponsoring today's webinar. And finally, thanks to everyone in the audience for participating in today's webinar. Please let us know how we did by filling out a program evaluation when you receive it in the post-event email, including links to the online evaluation, a PDF version of the presentation, and the on-demand recording of the program. Also, please visit our website, medtechintelligence.com, for related learning resources and educational programs from Ames Gross of Pacific Bridge Medical and MedTech Intelligence. I want to thank everyone for their time and for spending a little bit of their day with us. And again, thank you, Ames. It was great seeing you and a great presentation. And everyone, have a good rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you.